Okay, good evening, everybody. So this is a special budget presentation. So we're doing it this way because we're trying to shorten the time that we're meeting face to face for the parish council meeting later on this evening. So we've got that at 8 o'clock. And we have to meet as a council to set the precept, which is what we'll be doing. One of the main items we'll be doing later on. What we're planning to do in this session is to run through the budget that we've got or planned that's been put together by the budget proposal from the Finance Working Party. So I've got a presentation I'm going to run through, and then please stop at any time to ask questions as we go through that presentation. So I shall share my screen. Hopefully you can see that, the slides. And we'll go through and talk about the budget. So just as a little bit of background, so I know that this will be information you've heard before if you've been on the parish council for a few years, but the parish council can raise revenue to meet the spending requirements through the precept. So every January, as we're doing this January, we need to agree the precept for the next financial year. There's a deadline we need to fix because that needs to be provided to the district council, who then issue the council tax bills based on the precepts from the existing authority. And then we need to, what we'll then do is they issue the bills based on that precept. In the preparation for this, the working party has reviewed the council's spending commitments and created a draft budget for the year. The council, now we need to discuss and agree the budget, or we'll do that when we get together at 8 o'clock. We then agree the precept, and that together with the other income that we have and whatever we draw from reserves needs to cover our planned expenditure. So we've got a number of sources of income. There's the precept that we've talked about. So that's the total amount raised to the council tax from all the dwellings in the parish, and that is converted into an amount per council tax band, and that becomes part of your council tax bill. We've got income from facilities, so we hire out the community room and the pavilion and the glebe. We've got income from the community infrastructure levy. So this is a charge that's levied by local authorities, so the district council on new developments. But there are a lot of restrictions on how that's spent. So it can only be spent on new infrastructure or to maintain existing infrastructure to support new development. There's also restraints that we need to spend it within 5 years, and we need to spend first the money that came in first and work our way through that, because we get payments generally twice a year. So if we then switch to thinking about the budget then, so we do have a healthy level of reserves, and actually I'm just going to this is the key bit. So the reserves is the amount of money that we hold as a council. So the reserves are this is effectively the money that we are holding in the bank, and there are some guidance and rules about how we deal with that. There's then it's worth saying actually on that the reserves are looking a little bit better than they were, because we had some money that came in from COVID grants. So on that bit we gained a little bit against where we thought we were going to be, because of that of those grants that we weren't expecting. unfortunately, the flip side is rather worse. So we've lost quite a bit of money over the last 3 years on income from facilities. Well, no, it's the last 2 years, sorry, on income for facilities compared to 3 years ago. So 3 years ago, on the hiring of the glebe, the pavilion and community room, we got just over £27,000 of income in. And then last year, we got to £268 for the entire year. So a massive drop, 26,748 pounds, and that money comes directly off our income. So we budgeted for a similar amount of income to 2019-2020 and had a big fall. If we look at this current year, then we are starting to see hirers returning, and that is helping in terms of the income that we're getting. But if you look at the forecast that we see for the year, then we're still expecting that's only going to be 13,150, so a little bit less than half of that figure in 2019-2020. And then the key thing that we need to consider is that we need to retain in the reserves. We need to retain at 25% of the net revenue expenditure. So this figure looks at overall. We look at the overall revenue expenditure and effectively take off any loan repayments, of which we have one, which covers the loan that was taken out for the glebe, and that's still got quite a few years to run. That, and then we look at what we've got left and compare that to that expenditure to the amount of money that we're putting into that we've got left in reserves. I'm just going to talk then through some of the changes that we're making for this year. So first of all, and this is something actually that we've done for the last few years, is looking at how we maximise the use of the community infrastructure levy. So before this levy came along, then we didn't. Then effectively any maintenance we needed to do, any money we needed to put in for highways improvements or facilities improvements or anything like that, we had to pay for that out of the money we were raising from the precept or the money we were getting in from hiring. We now are using the first point of call for any of those improvements is going to be the community infrastructure levy. The next thing that we've done is we started a role, this time bank coordinator, in February 2020, which turned out to be extremely well planned, because the time bank coordinator was extremely useful during the first lockdown in terms of helping with volunteer activities and so on in the village. But that wasn't actually the primary purpose, but it was with what we're looking with time banking is this is where people give an hour of their time for using their skills, and they get an hour back from other people, and they share those opportunities, effectively volunteering for each other, but it creates quite a good community effect. And the time bank coordinator has been doing a number of other events to build up some of those community activities. For the first 2 years, we had grant funding available for that, and that covered about half the costs. Going on for this coming year, we need to fully fund those costs. And then the next significant change is the expected income from facilities. So We are expecting an increase, we're forecasting an increase from last year. So last year we had the £13,150. That's actual plus the forecast for the to the end of March. So we are looking at just over £4,000 more, but that's still nearly £10,000 down on where we were a couple of years ago. Hopefully we will get more hirers coming back, but we want to be cautious about budgeting for that until we actually see those hirers coming back. Then other items we're looking to spend. So last year, when the finances were very tight, we cut a budget we had for grants for organisations. Although actually in the end we did give some grants. So we are looking to put back into the budget for this coming year £1,500 that community groups in the village can apply for grants. One of the things that we discussed a few months ago at the parish council was there was a request to install a defibrillator at the glebe. So we think we looked at whether we could pay for that by SIL, but we concluded that we couldn't. So we previously agreed that we would then look to include that in the budget. Hence, that's there. We're looking on the IT side to move everything into the cloud. So looking at an Office 365 SharePoint migration. Currently, files sit on a physical hardware in the glebe. There's a one-off cost for that, but longer term, we're expecting lower IT costs, and it also helps us support hybrid working because that the access to those files is equally available whether staff are sitting in the office in the glebe or working remotely. We are in the process of agreeing a new lease with Sutton Parish charity, and whenever you're putting a legal agreement together, there are fees for that. So we budgeted for the solicitor's fees for the parish council side of that. We did a review of the personnel committee, so the committee that looks after staffing. We did a review of that at the last meeting, and that has some financial implications that we're building into the budget. The other thing that we concluded when we were putting together the budget proposal was that we had an apprentice we took on who completed his apprenticeship, and we'd agreed to continue that employment through to the end of this financial year. We were concerned that we couldn't support that going forward. We haven't included that in the budget proposal, because that would be a significant cost on top of what we're doing, but we can come back and talk more about that. And then there are a few things that we also haven't well, there's one other major thing that we haven't included, and that is that prior to COVID we used to run the Connections bus service. It wasn't run in 2020-2021 due to the COVID restrictions, and we didn't fund it in the current financial year. That's quite an expensive option, so that's around about £10,000 a year. So if we were to do that, that would add about 7% to the precept. But we did have before Christmas a discussion with someone from the youth service who was giving us some ideas on what was being done in other villages to look at improving youth provision, and also gave us some indication that there were potentially some grants around to help improve that. So although we're not proposing to include the Connections bus service, because that would be a substantial cost onto the increase in the council tax, we are looking at how we can get some youth provision going. It's worth bearing in mind that although we were paying for the bus to come along, of course we do have council facilities which we could use to host sort of youth activities, and that could well be a much cheaper solution than relying on the bus, and doesn't have the same constraints in terms of the number of people that you can have in there. So I'm just going to quickly stop at that point and see if anyone has got any particular questions on anything we've covered so far, or is that all pretty clear? All clear?
Certainly sounds it.
Okay, right. So let me go back to the presentation. I'm actually just switching to one that's got a couple of new bits of information in. One. I'll go back and through the presentation again. So we've got those changes I talked about. So what that then takes us to what we're recommending for the precept. So last year, because of that massive loss in income, where we've gone from £27,000 income to £268 income for the facilities, we reduced expenditure and in a number of areas, but we still had to increase the precept by 4% to keep the reserves at the right level. Worse still, because of the way that the district council were budgeting for collection of the council tax, because they were factoring in effects of COVID, meaning they would collect less council tax. That 4% increase equated to a 5.3% increase in the council tax. This year, where the numbers help us in the opposite way. So we're proposing this year, based on the proposals the Finance Working Party has gone through and the ones I've just summarised, we're proposing a precept increase to £155,000. So that's a 7.4% increase in the precept, but that only leads to a 2.6% increase in the council tax. So whereas last year, because of those various factors, we had an increase that was above inflation at the time, we're now have got something much lower. Meanwhile, inflation, of course, has gone up. So it only equates to around about a 5p per week increase for a Band D property, because everyone pays that £110 in a Band D property, pays £110.47 for a year. If you're in a C, B, or A, pay less. If you're in a E, F, or G, you pay more. The major factor there that's meant that we can have we get a smaller council tax increase is that we now have more properties that are paying council tax in the village. So we have, in particular, the in the figures for last year, the over 70 homes that we've got at the end of Meaple Road, part of the Lindens Homes development, weren't included in the calculation. Almost all of those are now included in the calculation. I think the one home that isn't occupied or finished being built yet isn't included. So that gives us that 2.6% increase. The thing that I mentioned earlier that we have to be very careful about is the general reserve and making sure that we don't fall below that 25% figure. So this year, if we look at just the income that we're projecting from facilities and the precept in the current financial year, we're anticipating drawing about £11,835 from reserves, That then means that we would have a balance at the end of March this year in general reserves at £65,700. Based on the budget that we're proposing at the moment, then there will be a draw of just over £5,000 in the next year, which would mean that we would get to the 31st of March next year, we get £60,584. So we'd be down to 35% of the net revenue expenditure. Remember, where we have to keep above the 25%. So what we do there is we also need to then look at try to model what the situation is going to look like in future years, because currently if we're budgeting to spend more than we raise on the income that we receive, we're drawing reserves. You can only do that until the reserves get down to 25%, and then you have a problem. So we want to try and avoid that problem. So we've looked at the budget for 3 years with just some notional 2.5% annual increase in expenditure and a notional 2.5% increase in the precept. Obviously, both those figures we will the actual amounts we will agree this time next year for next year's budget and the following year for the budget after that. What that shows is the figures that you see here. So the top line there is the cash requirement. So this current year we expect to have spent £156,000 based on the budget we're putting forward. Next year we expect it to be 160,000. Next year, for the forecast, we strip out the one-off costs. So a key example of a one-off cost that we would strip out is the defibrillator, because we install that this year or next financial year, and there's no ongoing expenditure. That's why you then see a lower figure. So we strip out the one-off costs, then apply the 2.5% increase. We get £158,000 next year, and the year after next, 162, 2 years ahead. And then you see the precept going up by 2.5%. And what you'll see is those same figures I've just talked about for this current financial year of just under £12,000 withdrawn from reserves. This coming year, based on the budget we're proposing, just over £5,000. And then you'll see for the next 2 years, it broadly balances. There's a few £100 difference, but it's broadly neutral. So we're not drawing on reserves. So you'll see what that means is that next year reserves will be at 35%. The following 2 years, they'll be at 32%. So we're still above that 25%. So comfortably above that, and the good thing is that we're in a position of expenditure matching the income. But this is just a forecast. It's not based on any decisions we've made on the budget. And of course, the other thing I should add in there is there are some assumptions about the rising income from facilities coming back in. So there is a risk there that if we don't see that increase that we expect to £17,000 next year and some further increases in future years, there's a risk we have to draw more on reserves, and that 32% figure could get less. So that's why we're looking a little bit cautiously at this. And so, as you can see, in this year and next year, we are looking to help support our funding from reserves, but we can't keep calling on reserves year after year because we go below that threshold. And what we're doing to make sure that that's under control is being making sure that we've got good budget control in place, the financial risk management that we're doing, and of course maximising the use of the CIL, the Community Infrastructure Levy. If we look sort of the medium term, so beyond the next couple of years, then we are expecting in that, as I've mentioned, recovery in the hiring income. We are assuming that 2.5% annual precept increase, but of course, if the income comes in better, we could set a lower precept, or if we feel we need to, we could go the other way, but that's entirely up to us to set in future years. And we aren't relying on the general reserve in those future years. So that's what we're doing in terms of the medium term. Then finally, the reserves I was talking about are the money that's just sitting there that we haven't allocated any particular expenditure for. So that's really there as a contingency should we hit major problems, and that's where this 25% guidance comes from. What we have done with the SIL money is we've earmarked a number of items where we do want to, where we will spend that money. So SIL money we get twice a year from developments in the village. The last couple of years have been particularly good because of the primarily because of the Linden Homes development, but obviously there's been a number of other smaller developments in the village that have also contributed to that. What we're proposing to do for next year is earmarking £1,000 for the burial ground maintenance, £3,000 for the glebe maintenance, £3,000 for the pavilion, £2,000 for the community room, and then £1,000 for the Brookton Centre, because we are the freeholder for the site where which has got the British Legion. So we are responsible for maintenance of the site. The British Legion Club has responsibility for, as the leaseholder, for maintenance of the building. We had a plan that we discussed previously about some office alterations of the glebe, so we are looking to do that from the from SIL funds as well. And then fairly recently we agreed to go ahead in principle to make improvements to the gravel, or it's more mud at the moment, footpath that's along Bury Lane once the asphalt path runs out. So we're currently looking at tenders for that, and we agreed that we would look to facilitate that. So we reserved £60,000 for that. We've got a local highways initiative bid in for a better crossing across the end of the brook where it gets close to the high street. We're looking for the from memory, I think it's around about half to be paid for by the county council and the parish council to contribute the other half. So that's our contribution there. Obviously that we would only spend that if we get the grant, if we're successful in the bid to the county council. And then we've had a number of proposals that we've looked at for sort of for benches and planters. So there's several recommendations that are coming from the Sports and Recreation Working Party. One that came from the last Working Party meeting was around a couple of sort of sturdy picnic tables by the Stirling Way play area. We're discussing potentially some Platinum Jubilee benches to commemorate the Queen's Jubilee whilst providing more seats in the village. And then there's also sort of discussion around potentially the idea of having some planters to enhance the village. So none of those are formally agreed expenditure yet. It's been planned by the council, but we think it's prudent to earmark some of the SIL money for that, so that should we want to go ahead with any of those proposals, we've got some money for that. If you then look at what's left, we've got from the SIL money we received last year, we've got just over £13,000 left. We've spent the money we've received in previous years, and then this current financial year we've received just over £55,000. So we've got another £68,000 of SIL money that we haven't spent yet, that we will need to spend within the next 5 years on, or actually for the £13,000 within the next 4 years on either infrastructure improvements or maintenance or new initiatives. And there are one or two others that we've been talking about that we might look to use the SIL money for. So a couple of examples is we were looking at potentially some improvements around the old wreck, but those are still at a very early stage. And the other one is we were looking to potentially install a couple of electric vehicle charging points at the Glebe and at the Brooklands Centre. We should be able to get 75% of that paid for by a government grant that's available, but we'd need to add in another 25%. So potentially so we've got those two ideas already that are coming out that we might want to allocate that and allocated SIL money for, but we really haven't got far enough to know how much those schemes are going to cost yet. So we haven't allocated any money for those. And that's the last slide. So does anyone want me to go back to talk about any particular slides, or do we want to?
Yes, you put a piece in chat earlier on.
Okay, missed that. Go on.
Say that again, Brendan.
Didn't you put a piece in chat earlier on?
No.
No.
Also did.
I think the only chat was the link to the YouTube.
Yeah. So do we have any, we have to have the debate when we meet face to face in terms of exactly what we want to do, but has anybody got any questions or concerns about what we're proposing at the moment that we could sort of talk about now, but then need to hold over properly for the debate? Or is it all completely clear? Brett?
Just one question, Chair. Sources of revenue. What about the church land down on Chain Causeway that we rent? Is that really a minuscule amount of income, or
it's Tracy, do you want to just sort of comment on that?
Yeah, this is an area of land on Chain Causeway that we, the parish council rents out to farmers for farm allotments. We have to pay the drainage rates as a small admin charge and the rent itself. And we don't actually technically make any money that goes back into the full council general reserves. Any surplus is to be used for sort of the upkeep of the area, should that be necessary. So it's not actually sort of income that goes into the general reserve fund to be used as such.
Yeah, thank you, Rose. I was aware the rents are fairly minimal. Just wondered, I don't know how many acres we have down there, but yeah, I would have thought it was a minimal amount, but it was worth asking that question just in case we're missing something. Yeah. Thank you.
Jessica?
I don't know if this is a question for now or later. Happy to be told it's for discussion later. What happens if we do want to re-employ or extend the employment of the administrative assistant? How would that make things, would that alter things drastically?
So it's broadly, it's just under 7% extra. So that would take us from a 2.5% increase to a 9.5% increase.
No, that doesn't mean a lot to me, Mark, sorry.
So in terms of the council, the amount the council tax goes up by. So
that's 2 pence, and so taking it from 5 pence a week to 7 pence a week or something like that.
No, it would take the increase from 5 to not quite to about 18p or something like that. But it would be we could debate that. My concern would be that would then give us an increase that's well above inflation.
What about staff pay increases as well? Is that factored in?
That's factored in, yes. So that's
okay.
the personnel committee sort of reviews the staffing. And then we budget that based on what they've reviewed.
So that's already been accounted for.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Any other questions? If not, then we can call the presentation to a close, and then we can resume face to face at 8 o'clock.
That's at the pavilion.
Certainly is.
Yeah. Okay, and we've stopped the